You
I'm
working
starting the stream
overtime.
now. Give me a couple seconds and I'll let you know when it's
Okay.
ready. Hey, we're go for the stream.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education Finance Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education Finance Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. The time is 6 p.m. Joining me tonight is Board Chair Diane Carpio and Board Secretary Kara Nelson-Bakey. Also with us tonight is Norwalk Public Schools CFO, Mr. Lunda Asmani. First, I will entertain a motion for the approval of the November 13, 24 and January 22, 25 minutes. Are there any revisions or amendments?
So I had one revision to the November 13th minutes, which is you'll see at the beginning where it talks about our start time of that meeting. It says 6:01 a.m.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Kara.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I saw that. That was the only thing I saw too.
Mm-hmm.
So I will entertain a motion for the amended minutes for approval. Ms.
Second.
Carpio and second by Ms. Bakey. The motion is passed. Are there any public comments? I don't see anybody on. If there are any email comments, they will be included in the record. Since there are no comments, next on the agenda for review and possible action is the January 25 budget transfers. I'll hand the meeting over to you, Mr. Asmani.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can everybody see?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So we only have two transfers this month. The first one is really reclassifying expenses within CGS. It's allocating the budget for music teacher into the arts teacher account. This is just to allow us to do better tracking and accounting in the correct line items. And then the second one is similar. It has to do with CMS, World Teacher Languages, and this is half a FTE that was initially budgeted on the CMS school budget, but we're moving it to the Roten school budget, which is where it should be. So you'll see that the numbers are exactly equal, the from and the to. And so we would like you to approve this so that we can properly account for these expenses in the right budget categories.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions on the transfers? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Motion.
Motion by Ms. Bakey, second. Ms. Carpio, would you want to make the second? You're on mute. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. That motion is passed. Next on the agenda is the FY25 year-to-date budget review and FY26 budget development update. And Mr. Asmani, I'll hand it back over to you again.
Sure, I'll start with a budget review, and I just want to make sure you can see the screen still, the budget screen?
The transfer is still up.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I'll do something different here. Okay, I'm going to stop share and reshare.
Okay.
You can see the screen?
Yes. Yep. General fund year to date. Mm-hmm.
General fund year to date, yes. So for the general fund year to date, we are the original budget was 233.36 million. Year to date, we are at 126.06 million. It is about 3.5% more than when we were last year. But again, this is consistent with the budget itself. This year's budget is approximately 4% higher than the budget last year. And so that is consistent with the trends for this time last year. So I'll kind of go over the buckets. You have the line item detail in your packet. So, with 7 months in, so we are 58% of the year through. And in terms of salaries, we are at about 52% year to spend, which is about 6.3% year over year. One thing that we are noticing this year is in the past, we have had somewhat higher turnover in our positions. And this year, in terms of turnover, we're not seeing as many vacancies, and therefore our salaries trend is more consistent with what the budget is. And so we believe that even though we budget for turnover annually, we will come in at about where we think we had budgeted for the year. We will still have some salary savings, but not to the extent that we've had in prior years. So it's somewhat of a good news that we are being able to fill our positions. The next one is our benefits. You'll see that it reflects 47% year over year percent of budget spent. It is about 16% less than where we were this time last year. Part of that, you recall, when we approved this year's budget, because we had some balances in the benefits in the employee health insurance, we're not transferring as much this year into the health insurance. For the funds, you'll see, for example, in FY24, we transferred 38.94 million. This year's budget is 35 million. And so that's part of the reason why you're seeing that lower spend year over year. But in terms of where we are for the year, we are at 47%, which is consistent with where we would be this year. So this is a line we monitor very closely because it is somewhat driven by health experience on our employees, but then it also driven by turnover. So you may have an employee, for example, that had family coverage. If that employee retires from the organization and their replacement doesn't have a family, or it doesn't have their entire family covered, we make those adjustments throughout the year for that transfer. And so we watch this, and then by the end of the fourth quarter, we'll have a better idea of where this is. But again, everything is trending consistently with where we would anticipate that to be. Professional and technical services, it is right on target at 52% of the budget spent year over year. It is about almost 22% year over year higher than where we were last year. This is really due to timing and when these when field trips and other things happen. You will note that in your detail line item, line 324, there is an item for field trips. These are trips that our students take when they go to various sites. This is transportation expenses. So they ride the school buses, or we ride some, the coach buses. But when we pay for transportation related to field trips, we code those to the field trip expenses, the line 324, versus the 500 line where we record other transportation expenses. Property services, primarily, these are contracts just to keep our properties up, security contracts, sanitorial contracts, and those types of things, and just general maintenance of our facilities. Property services, again, this is timing because some of these are contracts that we pay up at the beginning of the year. So percent of the budget spent is 60%. It's about 4.5% higher than where we were this time last year. But again, it is consistent with what we would anticipate for this particular line. Other services, these include some of our transportation expenses. Also, general transportation expenses are included in other services. And therefore, again, these are trending at about 9.5%, 77% of budget spent year to date. But again, other services are related to contracts that we have and payment of those contracts. Included in other services is our out of district tuition for special ed. We have been sharing with you that we anticipate that we would go slightly over in terms of the budget for this particular line in other services. Throughout the months, we will be transferring funding from other line items that are underspending into the other services line to keep up with that trend. And so we are monitoring that closely as well. But that's why you're seeing that that is trending a little bit higher year over year. It is largely driven by our out of district tuition and special ed transportation within the district.
Mhm.
Our equipment line is trending consistently to where we would be. We're actually a little bit low, higher than where we were last year. We're at 54% of the budget, about 24% of the year. But this is just basically tied to when we purchase these equipment. It's timing. We do a lot of purchasing of equipment at the beginning of the school year, and then as the year progresses, it kind of begins to level out. Other objects are items that don't specifically have a clearly defined in any of these other areas. But if you look at your backup, you will see what these are. They include instructional equipment, machinery, vehicles maintenance, and those types of things. Those are considered in those other objects. And then the transfer to other funds, to food services fund. This is the transfer to the food services fund. This year we budgeted $500,000, which is in the original budget. We haven't made that transfer yet. We typically make that transfer at the end of the year. We will make adjustments. We do anticipate that the transfer into the food services account will be slightly higher than the $500,000. And so we will be moving, you will see as we make budget transfer request in the next couple of months, you will see lines that relate to food services transfer that will exceed the $500,000. But we plan on using funds within the existing budget to do that. So that's really the general fund. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, whether on this summary or relating to the line items that you have in front of you.
So I have a question on the bottom percent of budget spent. Is that supposed to be 4.49? Shouldn't that be something bigger?
It is something bigger. That is a formula error. I apologize.
That's what I thought. I'm looking at that. It should be maybe 44 or something, 44.49 or something like that, right? 55?
Correct.
I don't know.
Correct. There's a decimal.
Right. That's what I thought. I was like, there's no way that can just be that.
Would be nice.
Right. Exactly. So I have a quick question, Mr. Asmani. So
Sure.
in the detail, in the 600 category under miscellaneous, it's 639. And it's about
Yes.
168,000. What is that for? Because I see that it wasn't in there from last year. So I was just wondering what that is.
Yes, so that's a great question. So the 168,000, we obviously we partner with Chartwells to provide food services during the summer. So this year we did receive an invoice from Chartwells for 168,083, which is exactly what was charged to this account. The food services is a federal grant that we get through the Department of Agriculture. And so when this invoice was received, as part of the audit, they informed us that based on when the invoice was paid, it could not be charged to the Chartwells account because we had recently did a RFP for Chartwells. And when we signed the new contract with Chartwells was just before, just after this particular invoice came in. So even though we did not change Chartwells as a vendor, but this invoice was tied to the new account because it's a new year. But we had not transactionally completed the signing of the contract with Chartwells. So what they told us was this needed to be charged to the local budget. And so we charged that to the general fund. Back in October, in the transfers that you reviewed, there was a transfer for 168,083 so that we could pay out of this expense because this was a line item that didn't have a budget assigned to it because this would be a Chartwells expense. So essentially what we did, the funding that would be transferred into the food services account that would have paid for this expense will remain in the general fund and will pay for the same expense. So it's really left pocket, right pocket, but that's really what that is. But that was a very, very good catch, Sherry.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? You guys, anybody? So, Mr. Rosmani, you can continue. Now we're going to get a FY26 budget development update.
Yes, so, and you have the grant funds and the food services fund.
Oh, I forgot. Yes,
details.
that's on there too. Yes, I forgot
That's
about
on
that.
there
Yep.
too, so you have that.
Yeah,
But I did
yeah.
want to give you
Mhm,
an update of where we are with the budget process.
mhm.
I'll start with the capital budget. You recall that the board approved a capital budget of 7.4 million. The mayor and the CFO did make a recommendation after reviewing all of the city's capital budgets, including the city department. Our capital budget was approved at 6.9 million, which is slightly less than the 7.4 that was requested. And so on this, you'll see that the adjustments were made to the first line was school security from 554 to 327. And what we did there, the difference is actually we carry that over to next year, will be part of next year's ask. And we worked with Ryan and Deputy Superintendent Fayos just in terms of how we time these projects. So we're comfortable with that. It's really just the timing, understanding that on the city side, they do have to limit how much they can borrow in any given year. So this was something that we worked with them prior to this being selected. So they gave us the opportunity to make these adjustments.
Linda,
the
do you
other-
know what the line item was from security that's being pushed into next year?
I can get that for you. I believe it is the AI technology.
Okay.
It is the AI technology that we're pushing into
Monitoring
next year.
for
The
security
monitoring,
cameras
yes.
and stuff.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
The next one that was slightly reduced by 200,000 was project number 3, the high school computers and labs. And so we worked with Ralph Valencisi. What he's doing here is, as you know, we're a 1-to-1 district, and so we're going to phase the replacement cycle of these computers. I think there are about 200 or so devices that will carry on into the following fiscal year. And Ralph was comfortable doing that just after reviewing the state of the technology and where they were. So that was something that was changed. And then I believe the other one that we changed, there was a curriculum one. Let's see, that was the social studies curriculum, project number 4. It went from 250 to 200,000. And again, this is after reviewing what social studies and science materials we're going to buy this year versus what we're going to buy next year. So there was a reduction of 50,000 there, and that's what got us to the 6.9 million. But other than those 4 projects, the mayor recommended approval of all of the other projects at the levels that we had requested, which is really nice. Where this is now, we did have a public hearing with planning and zoning. They're going to be making their recommendation. They're only looking at how these projects align to the plan of conservation and development, and they all do. So we don't anticipate that planning and zoning will make any changes to the request before it goes to the mayor to take one final look at our request. But that's where we are with the capital projects. I'd be happy to answer any capital project questions before I go to the operating budget.
It looks good. I'm glad that it's stayed pretty much the same and most of the requests were honored. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yes. So as far as the operating budget, as you know, on Monday, the mayor did present the mayor's recommended operating budget request. So I have these 2 charts just to kind of provide some context. The chart to my left is the FY25 operating budget development from the time we made the initial request all the way to the BET approval and the BOE approval of the reconciliation. You'll see that, we started at 14.2. The mayor's recommendation was 4%. The council set a cap that would allow for the 4% funding. However, as you recall, when it went to the BET, it was reduced to 3%. So following that same trend this year, we requested 9.7, the superintendent recommended 9.7, and the board approved 9.7. The mayor's recommendation was 4%. It is now up to the Common Council to set the cap before sending it to the BET. There is a public hearing on Thursday, and our principals have been reaching out to families so that they could come and make their voices heard, because what we would hope to see happen is, at minimum, the council not only keeps the cap at 4%, not below 4%, but also the BET kind of stays within that 4% range, or higher. The BET does have the authority to go higher, but we are hoping that it doesn't drop below the 4%, as was the case last year. In terms of raw numbers, what the BOE had tentatively approved was 255.96 million. The mayor's approval at 4% is 242.69. So the difference between what was requested and what was approved is about 13.27 million. And so right now we're going into the development of our school-based budgets. And so as far as where we are with the schools, we have had to give them targets that align with the 4% mayor's recommendation. So we will be working with the schools over the next couple of weeks. We start our school-based budgets 2 weeks right after the winter break, but we will be looking at some significant reductions on the school budget side. As you recall, we had made some initial reductions in the central office side just to get to the 9.7%. But this is where we are with budget development. We're looking forward to the public hearing tomorrow actually.
Tomorrow night, yeah.
Tomorrow night will be the public hearing, and then we will also have an opportunity to present our budget to the BET in March before they make their cap and recommendation. As you know, the BET does have line item authority to make these adjustments, unlike the council that only can set the cap. So we're going to have conversations with the BET and try to, as best to make our case that do not go below. We hope that they do not go below the 4%.
So anybody have any questions before I make my comments? I feel we need to go back because I jumped the gun and didn't have you very briefly do your presentation for the grant pocket of money and also the grant and the food service. So if you don't mind, unless anybody has any questions before Mr. Osmani does that.
No questions.
Okay.
So as far as the grant budget, again, we've spent about 50% of our grants this year. As you can see, that in FY24, our total spend on the grants was 48 million. With the expiration of the ESSER funds, our grants were significantly reduced. FY25, the year we're in, we have only $35 million worth of grant funding. You recall that I want to say maybe 2-3 weeks ago, there was a memo issued by the Office of Management and Budget at the federal level that there were to be some freezes on grants. So we started to analyze what would that mean. Now, there has been a temporary pause on that, but we receive most of our grants flow through the state. We do have 2 grants that we receive directly from the federal government. We have the Marine Science Grant, the most recent one, that comes directly to Norwalk Public Schools. And then we also have the MSAP grant, the Magnet School Assistance Program, that comes directly to us. The MSAP grant was that $15 million 5-year grant, about $3 million a year annually on that grant. So we are monitoring these closely because we still don't know how these would be impacted. The other thing we're also watching is the governor's proposed budget. You'll recall that the governor has proposed additional alliance funding to schools. However, the governor's proposal is additional funding in fiscal year 27, not fiscal year 26. We do know that the General Assembly does have a proposal for additional funding fiscal year 25, but it's still in the process. So we won't know for sure until possibly April or May, where the two meet. Obviously, the governor and the General Assembly will reconcile their budget, and we'll have a better sense of what that number is. What we have been told as far as the federal dollars are concerned, because they've already been appropriated, we should be fine for fiscal year 25, but there is some uncertainty with fiscal year 26. But again, things are changing very quickly. There are some changes. Today I read that, the Department of Education may be abolished. So all of these assurances were given. It's really hard to take them to the bank because things are so fluid. But we are monitoring our grants closely. As you know, about 20% of our overall budget is grant funded, and therefore any disruptions to the grant revenue that we get would have significant impact on the local side of the budget as well. I'd be happy to answer any grant questions before I move on to the food services.
I just have a comment. I feel like from what we've seen, that you all need to be coming up with a plan B and C in case these grants do go away or they are significantly decreased. Because you can't run a program based on should, right?
Correct.
We're dealing with an administration who doesn't always tell the truth, so you just don't know, and it's really difficult. It's unfortunate.
Yes, it
Very
is. It
unfortunate.
is. I was at a session, I think it was last week, where we met some Connecticut finance officers, and we're all panicking, unsure of what's happening, not only on the Board of Ed side, but cities also receive quite a number of grants as well, just to run their operations. CDBG, housing grants, transportation grants.
Absolutely.
So
much.
so there's a lot. There's so much that flows from the federal government up to us. So we're watching and hoping for the best. But to your point, Sherry, we are starting to think about what if scenarios as well.
It's almost like we need to, unfortunately, try to envision like what is the worst case scenario, and how do we operate in that?
Yeah.
Right, and that is part of the conversation we're having as well. As part of this budget development process, is a review of those grants. I actually met with the grants team this afternoon to kind of continue that conversation and seeing what is and what isn't on the chopping block at this point.
I saw a presser from Representative Johanna Hayes today. I don't know. I believe she probably did it today. I'm not sure, but she was talking about the Department of Education and exactly what they're responsible for. And she said if it were to go away, either school districts would be looking at eliminating programs and or increasing taxes, because much of what they administer has to do with laws. So when it comes to specialized learning, if there's no Department of Education, that would mean that states and or municipalities would have to fund that.
That is so very true. I was at the meeting with some state representatives a couple weeks ago, and that was the biggest concern is, all the legalities behind anything and the state mandates that, here we're talking about what ifs. And like you said, Sherry, we have to think about worst case scenario, but I have to give a lot of kudos to Mr. Osmani and his team, because what people don't realize is they are on all the time. Every day is with that pencil. Those numbers are changing. I know they're stressed out. They're not only thinking about the children, they're thinking about staff, they're thinking about the district, they're thinking about, the community. So this is a bigger picture. And this year, I think, for me at least, is one of the hardest years that we've had conversations on the budget.
It is challenging. We had last week as well, we were on a conference call with Congressman Himes as well. He kind of wanted to hear from other people in the state, what are some of the concerns. And so that was a very humbling, sad meeting, because people, we just don't know, and everybody's looking for answers, and no one has answers, and there's just no direction. So yeah, this has been a challenging time.
And you're right, Lunda. When at my meeting, there was no directions, there was
Yeah.
no answers. Everybody is just flying by the seat of their pants and trying to figure things out on a daily basis. And it's a scary world right now that we're living in. And to think that, this affects our future, our children, our education. I mean, they are the future of this country. And here we are having these conversations, which are very tough.
I mean, I almost think like you have to think about we're going to be on our own. This guy is governing like he handled his business in Atlantic City. All of our municipalities and Board of Educations are going to be blown up like many of his businesses. And so we have to really stay one step ahead, because I think we have to expect that we're not going to get proper guidance from that administration. And so we have to outsmart them as best that we can. We're not going to allow our school district to get blown up and tattered and torn like many of his businesses.
Okay.
Then the last one is our food services fund that we just talked about. Again, this is trending as we expected to do. This is actually the biggest grant that we receive through the Department of Agriculture for the school lunch program. We have one grant that's specifically for school lunch program. Then there's one that funds the breakfast program, and also funds our summer programs. And so when we looked at this budget of 7.1 million, about 6 million, a little over 6 million is through that. This was one of the programs that was also on the block. And so again, we're impacted in so many ways, but we're trying to stay ahead of it. Jill and Deputy Ferrios, who oversees this, are also constantly in touch with their organizations to just kind of stay ahead of what's in, what's out. We got scared the other day when they had made this announcement, and we were thinking, oh, we have contract. We just signed a contract with Chartwells. How are we going to honor our contract with Chartwells to pay for food services if this grant goes away? The general fund cannot absorb $7 million if the grant goes away. So again, this is another area that is 90% grant funded. And it's a tremendous program for our children, but we're also monitoring it on this end as well.
Okay. Thank you,
And
Mr. Asmani.
sure.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, not on those two areas. Just back to the BOE operating budget, and
Yeah.
if there are any questions here in terms of what we need to do, we do have some dates that are coming up. I think are going to be critical for us to continue the advocacy, just to ensure that the cap that is set by the council at minimum allows for the mayor's recommendation to move forward, and the same when it comes to the BET.
I don't have any other questions or comments. Do ladies, Kara, Diana?
I just hope that we have good turnout tomorrow. I think we should
Yeah.
all be like promoting on social media and reaching out to people and asking them to turn up.
Correct. And it is a hybrid meeting, so for those that aren't able to make it in person, they can also appear virtually, so that would help as well.
Well, thank you for all of that information. We appreciate it on behalf of the board. You and your staff, as Diana had indicated, there's a lot of work that you've done in modifying and revising the numbers, and appreciate your work on that. If there
We
isn't
appreciate
anything
your
else,
leadership. It makes a difference when we have committed board that gives direction, and
Thank you.
so thank you.
Ladies, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion?
Seconded.
Motion, Ms. Bakey, second, Ms. Carpio. We are adjourned, and the time is 6:34.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good
Thanks,
night.
everybody.
Thank you,
Good
everybody.
night.
Have a good
Have a
night.
good night.
Bye-bye.